The silent ego in self improvement, there is a version of you that wakes up every morning with a quiet pressure in your chest, a subtle whisper that says you are not enough yet, not disciplined enough, not focused enough, not optimized enough. And so you reach for another book, another podcast, another productivity system, another morning routine that promises clarity, power, transformation. You tell yourself this is growth. You call it ambition. You frame it as responsibility. But beneath that polished narrative, there is something quieter and more dangerous operating in the background. It is the silent ego hidden inside self improvement. It does not scream. It does not brag. It does not demand applause. It disguises itself as humility and progress. It tells you that you are simply trying to be better. But what if the constant attempt to improve is not coming from clarity, but from avoidance? What if the endless optimization of your habits is a strategy to avoid feeling something uncomfortable? Self improvement, at its core, is not toxic. Growth is natural. Learning is healthy. Expanding your skills and strengthening your mind can be deeply meaningful. The problem begins when self improvement becomes a coping mechanism, when it becomes a shield, when it becomes the way you escape from sitting still with your own unresolved emotions. You say you want to become more disciplined, but what if you are actually trying to outrun shame? You say you want to maximize your time, but what if you are terrified of being alone with your thoughts? You say you want to build a better body, a sharper mind, a stronger identity, but what if deep down you believe that you are right now is fundamentally insufficient? This is where the silent ego hides. It convinces you that the future version of yourself is worthy and the present version is a project under construction. It subtly postpones self acceptance. It whispers, when you finally fix yourself, then you can relax. Then you can feel secure. Then you can love who you are. And so you chase improvement not out of curiosity, but out of fear. Not out of inspiration, but out of inadequacy. You begin to measure your value in completed tasks, in books read, in habits tracked, in milestones achieved. You feel productive, but underneath the productivity there is tension. There is anxiety. There is the constant sense that you are behind. This is toxic productivity, and it often wears the mask of discipline. Toxic productivity is not about working hard. Hard work is not the enemy. The problem is when rest feels like guilt, when slowing down feels like failure, when doing nothing feels like falling behind. You cannot sit in silence without feeling the urge to optimize it. Even meditation becomes a performance. Even journaling becomes a metric. You track your sleep, your calories, your steps, your focus sessions, your reading speed, your screen time, and slowly your entire existence becomes a dashboard. You are no longer living, you are managing yourself. You are monitoring yourself. You are evaluating yourself. The silent ego loves this because it thrives on comparison. It thrives on hierarchy. It thrives on the idea that you are climbing toward a superior version of yourself. It reframes growth as a ladder, and every day you are either ascending or slipping. There is no neutral. There is no enough. There is only progress or regression. And this binary thinking creates constant internal pressure. You wake up already calculating whether today will make you better or worse. You begin to see relaxation as decay. You begin to see joy without productivity as indulgence. You begin to see yourself as a machine that must be tuned and upgraded. But humans are not machines. You are not software waiting for the next update. You are a living system with emotions, contradictions, fears, and desires that cannot be optimized into silence. When self improvement becomes avoidance, you use growth as a distraction from pain. Instead of processing rejection, you double down on self discipline. Instead of grieving a loss, you immerse yourself in skill acquisition. Instead of confronting insecurity, you build a hyper competent exterior. From the outside, it looks impressive. From the inside, it feels fragile because your identity becomes inflated. Identity inflation happens when you attach your sense of self to being the person who is always improving, always learning, always striving. You start to see yourself as more aware, more evolved, more disciplined than others. You begin to subtly judge those who are not on the same path. You tell yourself you are just committed to growth, but secretly you need that identity to feel superior, to feel safe, to feel in control. The silent ego feeds on this inflation. It loves being the one who reads more, trains harder, wakes earlier, sacrifices more. It turns humility into performance. It turns self-awareness into branding. And the more you inflate this identity, the more anxious you become about protecting it. Because now you cannot afford to fail. You cannot afford to be ordinary. You cannot afford to skip the workout or miss the routine because that would threaten the image you have built. So the self-improvement journey that once felt empowering begins to feel like a cage. You're trapped inside the persona of the person who is always growing. You cannot admit exhaustion because that would break the narrative. You cannot confess confusion because you are supposed to be self-aware. You cannot slow down because you are the disciplined one. And this is where anxiety intensifies. Not because growth is wrong, but because your identity is entangled with it. When your worth is conditional on progress, stagnation becomes terrifying. When your value is tied to productivity, rest becomes dangerous. When your self-respect depends on being exceptional, mediocrity feels like annihilation. The silent ego does not want peace. It wants elevation. It wants to be above, beyond, improved, optimized. It is addicted to becoming. But becoming is endless. There is always another book, another habit, another skill, another weakness to fix. The horizon keeps moving, and you keep chasing. Meanwhile, the present moment becomes a waiting room for a future version of yourself who never fully arrives. This is why self-improvement can make you more anxious, because it keeps you in a constant state of self-surveillance. You are always evaluating, always adjusting, always asking, am I doing enough? Am I improving fast enough? Am I falling behind? Even your downtime becomes strategic. You rest to recover so you can perform better later. You socialize to network. You exercise to optimize cognition. You meditate to increase productivity. Everything becomes instrumental. Nothing is allowed to simply exist. And beneath all of this is a quiet fear: if I stop improving, I will lose my value. That fear is rarely conscious. It hides behind ambition. It disguises itself as drive. But if you look closely, you may notice that your self-improvement habits are not bringing peace. They are bringing tension. They are not expanding your sense of self. They are narrowing it into a performance. You may notice that despite doing more, learning more, optimizing more, you feel less secure, not more. Because security does not come from endless upgrading. It comes from acceptance. And acceptance feels threatening to the silent ego. Acceptance says, you are already enough. The ego hears that as stagnation. Acceptance says, you do not need to earn your worth. The ego hears that as weakness. So it pushes you back into the cycle of improvement. It tells you that self-criticism is honesty. It tells you that pressure is necessary. It tells you that without constant striving, you will become lazy, irrelevant, forgotten. But look at the cost. Look at the chronic restlessness. Look at the inability to sit still without planning the next upgrade. Look at the subtle resentment toward yourself when you fail to meet your own standards. That resentment is not growth. It is self-rejection disguised as ambition. The silent ego thrives in that rejection because it keeps you dependent on improvement as a solution. It creates the wound and then sells you the remedy. It tells you that the anxiety you feel is a sign you need to work harder on yourself. But sometimes the anxiety is a sign you need to stop trying to fix yourself and start understanding yourself. There is a difference between evolving and escaping, between building strength and avoiding vulnerability, between discipline and self-punishment. In this first layer of awareness, you are not being asked to abandon growth. You are being asked to question the motivation behind it. Are you improving because you are curious about your potential, or because you are afraid of your current self? Are you building habits because they support your values, or because they distract you from discomfort? Are you striving because you are inspired, or because you believe you are not enough yet? The silent ego does not disappear overnight. It reveals itself slowly, in moments of tension. and the guilt you feel when resting, and the panic you feel when you imagine being average, and the subtle superiority you feel when you outperform others. Seeing it is the beginning, not judging it, not fighting it, just seeing it. Because once you see that some of your self improvement is driven by fear rather than love, you gain a choice. And that choice is the first crack in the cage. When growth becomes a performance, the more you identify with being someone who is constantly improving, the more your inner world begins to feel like a stage. You are no longer just living your life, you are evaluating it in real time. Every action becomes a data point, every mistake becomes evidence, every success becomes proof that the system is working. And slowly, without noticing, you shift from experiencing yourself to managing yourself. This is where self improvement quietly turns into performance. Not performance for other people, but performance for your own internal judge. You start waking up with a subtle checklist in your mind. Did you sleep well enough? Did you stick to your plan yesterday? Did you waste time? Are you on track? Even before the day begins, you are already assessing your value. This constant self monitoring creates a background hum of tension. You may call it accountability. You may frame it as high standards. But if you are honest, there's often fear underneath it. Fear of slipping, fear of regressing, fear of becoming the version of yourself you work so hard to leave behind. The irony is that the more you try to control yourself, the more fragile your sense of self becomes. Because now your identity depends on maintaining momentum. If you skip one habit, it is not just a missed task. It feels like a crack in who you are. If you feel unmotivated, it is not just a low energy day. It feels like evidence that you are losing your edge. This is identity inflation at work. You have built an image of yourself as disciplined, self aware, growth oriented, and that image becomes something you must defend. The silent ego loves this dynamic because it keeps you in a constant state of proving. You are proving to yourself that you are evolving. You are proving that you are not lazy. You are proving that you are different from your past. But proving is exhausting. It requires constant output. It leaves no room for softness. And over time, it disconnects you from your actual emotional reality. You might feel sadness but override it with productivity. You might feel loneliness but distract yourself with learning. You might feel uncertainty but bury it under planning. Self improvement becomes the most socially acceptable form of avoidance. No one criticizes you for reading more books. No one questions you for waking up at 5 a.m. No one tells you to slow down when you are chasing goals. In fact, you are praised, you are admired, and that admiration reinforces the cycle. You begin to equate external validation with internal worth. Even if you tell yourself you are doing it for you, there's often a subtle audience in your mind, a version of others watching your progress, approving, nodding, being impressed. The problem is that performance cannot create peace. It can create results. It can create admiration. It can create a sense of superiority. But it cannot create safety, because safety requires unconditional acceptance. And unconditional acceptance feels dangerous when your entire identity is built on becoming better. You start to notice that rest feels uneasy, not because your body cannot handle it, but because your ego cannot handle it. Rest means you are not advancing. Rest means you are not improving. Rest means you are temporarily ordinary. And if your self-worth is tied to being exceptional, ordinary feels threatening. This is how anxiety quietly grows inside self-development culture. You are surrounded by messages that tell you to optimize everything. Your mornings must be structured. Your thoughts must be intentional. Your time must be leveraged. Your network must be strategic. Your hobbies must be productive. Even your relaxation must be curated. You begin to internalize the idea that every moment should contribute to some higher trajectory. But a life that is always leveraged is rarely lived. It is managed. It is optimized. It is squeezed for output. And when you cannot maintain that level of optimization, you feel guilt. That guilt is not random. It is the byproduct of conditional self-acceptance. Somewhere along the way, you learn that being worthy requires progress. Maybe it started in childhood, where achievement brought praise. Maybe it developed in adolescence, where competence protected you from rejection. Maybe it solidified in adulthood, where productivity equaled survival. Whatever the origin, the pattern becomes internalized. You believe, often unconsciously, that if you stop growing, you will lose love, relevance, security. So you keep pushing. But here is the hidden cost. When growth is driven by fear, it amplifies the very insecurity it is trying to solve. Because fear-based growth reinforces the belief that the current you is not enough. Every new skill becomes evidence that the old you was inadequate. Every new habit implies that the previous version was flawed. And instead of building confidence, you build dependency on constant improvement. You cannot feel stable unless you are upgrading. This creates a fragile self-concept. On the surface, you look confident. You have goals. You have discipline. You have direction. But internally, your stability depends on maintaining that trajectory. The moment you plateau, doubt rushes in. The moment you fail, shame intensifies. The moment you slow down, anxiety spikes. This is not because you are weak. It is because your worth is entangled with motion. The silent ego does not want you to notice this entanglement. It wants you to believe that the anxiety is a sign you need to try harder. It reframes exhaustion as laziness. It reframes overwhelm as lack of resilience. It reframes emotional pain as a productivity problem. Instead of asking, "What am I feeling?" you ask, "How can I optimize this?" Instead of asking, "Why does this hurt?" you ask, "How can I fix this?" And in doing so, you skip the most important step, experiencing. You cannot out-discipline unresolved emotions. You cannot out-optimize grief. You cannot out-habit insecurity. They do not disappear because you become more efficient. They resurface in quieter ways, in irritability, in chronic tension, in the inability to relax, in the constant sense that something is missing. When self-improvement becomes a performance, you are no longer growing for expansion. You are growing for control. You are trying to control uncertainty, control vulnerability, control the possibility of being seen as inadequate. But control is not the same as confidence. True confidence includes the ability to be imperfect without collapse. It includes the ability to fail without identity crisis. It includes the ability to rest without guilt. If your self-improvement journey has made you more rigid, more anxious, more self-critical, then it is worth questioning the foundation. Not to abandon growth, but to recalibrate it. Because growth rooted in self-rejection will always feel urgent. It will always feel pressured. It will always feel like you are behind. Growth rooted in self-respect feels different. It feels spacious. It feels curious. It allows mistakes. It does not collapse when you pause. The silent ego resists the shift because it loses its leverage. It cannot manipulate you with fear if you no longer believe that your worth is conditional. It cannot drive you with comparison if you are no longer trying to be superior. It cannot inflate your identity if you are comfortable being ordinary sometimes. And this is where the real confrontation begins. Not with your habits, not with your goals, but with the belief that you must constantly become someone else to deserve peace. If you sit quietly and observe your drive to improve, you may start to see moments where it tightens your chest instead of opening it. You may notice that some of your goals feel heavy rather than inspiring. You may realize that your schedule is packed not because you love everything on it, but because emptiness feels unsafe. That realization is not a failure, it is awareness. And awareness is the first step toward transforming self-improvement from a coping mechanism into a conscious choice. Because until you see how the silent ego operates, you will keep mistaking anxiety for ambition. You will keep mistaking pressure for purpose. You will keep mistaking exhaustion for dedication. And you will continue chasing a future version of yourself that is always one achievement away from finally being enough. From compulsion to conscious growth, the turning point does not arrive with a dramatic collapse. It arrives quietly, often in a moment when you realize that despite all the progress, all the habits, all the systems, you still feel restless. You have optimized your mornings, structured your weeks, refined your goals, and yet there is a subtle tension that refuses to leave. That tension is not a sign that you need another framework. It is a signal that the foundation itself needs to shift. The silent ego loses its grip not when you abandon growth, but when you change the reason you grow. As long as improvement is driven by the need to escape who you are, it will carry anxiety with it. The moment growth becomes an expression rather than a compensation, the pressure begins to dissolve. This requires a confrontation with a simple but uncomfortable question. If you stopped improving for a while, who would you be? Notice the immediate reaction. There may be fear. There may be resistance. There may be a voice that says stopping means decline, irrelevance, mediocrity. That voice is the ego defending its structure. It equates stillness with decay because its entire identity is built on motion. But growth that cannot pause is not growth, it is compulsion. Compulsion feels urgent, rigid, necessary. Conscious growth feels intentional, flexible, chosen. To move from compulsion to conscious growth, you have to separate your worth from your output. This sounds simple, but psychologically it is radical. For years, maybe decades, you have trained your nervous system to associate achievement with safety. When you perform well, you feel secure. When you accomplish something, you feel valuable. When you fall short, you feel threatened. This conditioning does not disappear because you intellectually understand it. It shifts when you begin practicing a different internal response. When you fail, instead of escalating pressure, you allow curiosity. When you rest, instead of generating guilt, you observe the discomfort without obeying it. When you feel behind, instead of accelerating, you ask what the urgency is protecting. Often, urgency protects you from feeling inadequate. Often, acceleration protects you from feeling vulnerable. When you sit still without optimizing the moment, unresolved emotions surface. Boredom, sadness, insecurity, emptiness. These are the states self-improvement has been helping you avoid. The silent ego prefers a busy mind because a busy mind does not question its narrative. It keeps you focused on the next target, the next milestone, the next upgrade. But when you allow yourself to be unproductive without labeling it as failure, you start reclaiming parts of yourself that were rejected. You realize that being human includes fluctuation. It includes low energy days. It includes confusion. It includes mediocrity in certain areas. The ego hears mediocrity as a threat because it is obsessed with hierarchy. It wants you above average, ahead, exceptional. Yet a stable identity does not require superiority. It requires coherence. Coherence means your actions align with your values, not with your fear. You can still pursue excellence. You can still train, learn, build, create. But the emotional tone changes. There is less desperation, less comparison, less internal violence. You begin to notice the difference between inspired action and anxious action. Inspired action feels expansive. It energizes you even when it is difficult. Anxious action feels constricted. It is fueled by the need to prove or prevent. Both can produce results, but only one produces peace. When you examine your goals, you might discover that some of them were never truly yours. They were inherited from culture, from social media, from peers, from an internalized standard of what a successful person looks like. The silent ego adopted those goals because they offered status and validation. But status does not satisfy the deeper need for self-acceptance. So even after achieving them, the anxiety returns. The next level appears. The bar moves. The dissatisfaction persists. Conscious growth requires you to ask not only what you want to achieve, but why. If the why is rooted in fear of being insignificant, the pursuit will always feel tense. If the why is rooted in genuine interest, contribution, or expression, the pursuit feels lighter. You stop trying to outrun your past. You stop trying to outshine others. You start building because it feels aligned, not because it feels necessary for survival. This shift also changes your relationship with discipline. Discipline is no longer a weapon you use against yourself. It becomes a tool you use in service of something meaningful. You do not punish yourself into consistency. You design structures that support your energy rather than override it. You understand that rest is not regression but integration. You allow cycles instead of demanding constant upward trajectories. The silent ego thrives on linear narratives of endless ascent. Real growth is cyclical. There are phases of expansion and phases of consolidation. There are periods of intensity and periods of recalibration. When you accept this rhythm, anxiety decreases because you no longer interpret every slowdown as failure. You see it as part of the process. Another crucial shift happens in how you relate to comparison. As long as your identity is inflated around being the one who improves the most, comparison is inevitable. You scan others for signs of threat or confirmation. You feel ahead or behind. But when your worth is not tied to position, comparison loses its emotional charge. You can appreciate others' progress without it diminishing you. You can acknowledge someone's advantage without it invalidating your path. This does not mean you become passive. It means your drive is no longer reactive. You are not running because someone else is faster. You are moving because it feels right for you. The anxiety that once accompanied self-development begins to soften. You notice you can skip a habit without spiraling. You can have an unproductive day without questioning your identity. You can pursue a goal intensely without collapsing if it fails. This is psychological resilience, not because you became more rigid, but because you became less attached. The silent ego weakens when attachment weakens. It cannot manipulate you with the promise of becoming superior if you are already at peace with being imperfect. It cannot threaten you with mediocrity if you no longer equate mediocrity with worthlessness. It cannot keep you in constant striding if you are willing to be still. Ultimately, the trap of self-improvement was never about the habits themselves. It was about the belief that you must earn the right to feel okay. Once that belief is questioned, everything reorganizes. You still grow, but growth is not a rescue mission. You still learn, but learning is not a way to escape yourself. You still set goals, but goals are not proof of your value. They are expressions of your interest. The anxiety that once felt like motivation is revealed as fear. And when fear is no longer in charge, your energy changes. There is more space, more patience, more authenticity. You might even find that you achieve more, not because you are pushing harder, but because you are no longer wasting energy fighting yourself. The silent ego fades not through force, but through awareness and compassion. You see it when it tries to turn rest into guilt. You see it when it tries to turn growth into competition. You see it when it whispers that you are only one achievement away from finally being enough. And instead of obeying, you pause. You breathe. You remember that enough is not a future milestone. It is a present decision. From that place, self-improvement stops being an anxious race and becomes a conscious evolution, not driven by inadequacy, but guided by intention, not fueled by fear, but supported by acceptance. And in that shift, the very thing you were chasing through endless optimization quietly arrives, a sense of stability that does not depend on becoming someone else.